I've been watching my fair share of March Madness basketball games this year, as usual, and there are some impressive players in this year's tournament. There always are. You got to respect the amazing performances of the budding superstars. But what I enjoy even more is when teams play well as teams. When a team is on offense and they're in this continual flow of motion and passing the ball, it almost appears like they're thinking each other's thoughts and knowing where every teammate is going to be on the court at any given moment. That is a well-coached team. The coach trains their team to think not in terms of making amazing shots, but in terms of touches. The more members of your team who touch the ball, the more the defense has to wear itself out to keep up. And eventually, someone is going to have an open shot. Well, one of the reasons why I think many of us in church have a hard time with evangelism is this. We don't feel like superstars. We'd be much more comfortable letting the superstars handle telling unchurched people about the gospel, and we'll take care of the casserole for the covered dish dinner. I think we tend to put too much pressure on ourselves, and that makes us kind of stay in the shadows and not actually engage in ministry of outreach. Now, we know that Jesus has called all of us to be involved in carrying forward the gospel to the world around us. It is the primary mission of the church to go and make disciples of all nations. But if we're only thinking about scoring, sometimes we stop shooting because we're afraid that we'll miss. So, try thinking about evangelism in terms of touches. Many times it takes a whole bunch of touches before a person is ready to hear the good news of the message of Christ. You don't have to explain the whole message of the Bible in order for it to count as evangelism. So how do you think in terms of touches? Well, let's look at a couple of New Testament passages that give us instructions on how we should think about prioritizing our time, especially our time with people outside of the church. Let's turn first to Colossians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. It says, "Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." Now, there's so much wisdom packed into those two short sentences. But first off, notice that the Apostle Paul does not say this: show off your wisdom to outsiders and make every conversation always only about Jesus and the cross. No, Paul says that we should walk in wisdom toward outsiders. That means how we live our lives is already speaking the gospel before we even open our mouths. Living in agreement with God's word is already a strong testimony about the truth and the beauty of the gospel. But there's something even more important, more foundational about what Paul says. He says to walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. That means that you need to be intentional. Always think about how your life is being observed by those who are outside of the church. You need to be around outsiders in order to be seen by outsiders. And your life ought to be attractive to them. That means don't be a jerk. And it also means don't be a hypocrite whose life looks just like any other person's life outside of the church. Be different and live a life that looks like it has been changed by Jesus. And then Paul addresses our speech. He says, when you are talking with people outside of the church, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Again, you don't always have to turn the corner in a conversation so that you're bringing up the cross and the resurrection every time. But you should speak in a way that the other person feels the grace of Christ in your words. Salty speech is having conversations that are interesting and meaningful. And then Paul says that you should be ready to give an answer. If the opportunity comes up, Don't be afraid to answer their questions by bringing up Jesus and how he has changed your life. And then I want to turn us to Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware." Now, without going into the side issue of what does he mean by entertaining angels, what I want to focus on today is this. We have a tendency to neglect being hospitable. And the reason why we should eagerly make opportunities for hospitality is we never know what impact we might be having in another person's life. I've had at least 3 instances in recent weeks where I've been building relationships with people in my community, just being a friend and taking active steps to get to know them on a personal level. And at some point in these recent weeks, each of those people have initiated conversations with me about church or about their own faith journeys. And I'm praying that God will bring gospel fruitfulness to these relationships at some point. And I want to encourage you to think about making touches with people. Show an individual interest in a person. Ask an extra question, and then just listen for their answer. Ask someone their name and remember it. Use it the next time you see them. If you're like me, you might need to write it down in between. If someone shares with you something difficult going on in their lives, show some compassion and listen to their story. Don't just try to solve their problems. And by all means, don't pull the whole, "Oh, I know what you're going through. There was this one time me. Make them feel like they are important to you. Invite people to your house. Church, we have got to get better with this. Invite someone over for dinner. Sit on your front porch and have a conversation. Do a craft together. Roast marshmallows on a fire pit in your front yard, not hiding in your backyard. And invite your neighbors to join you. Invite someone over to watch March Madness basketball on your big screen TV. And don't tell me that you would do this if only you were more of an extrovert. Even introverts enjoy conversations with 1 or 2 people in settings that are not overwhelming. Just look for the ways that you can make a touch in someone else's life each day. Make opportunities to show them that your life is a life that has been claimed by Jesus, and pray that God will give you opportunities at the right time to invite them to church with you or to explain the good news to them. You don't need to be a superstar. Think in terms of touches. As always, God's word has all the wisdom you need for today's challenges.